And so he tells us at first he wants to turn to the impact of philosophic skepticism on religion and theology.
All right, so what were those effects? The impact of Hume, Kant, and positivists on discomfort with miracles and other transcendent claims remains in some theological circles, although much ground has been taken back by those working in philosophy of religion and philosophical theology. And you know, we have that even with we have that with determinism and free will movement. You know, everyone was a determinist at some point until people who took their theology seriously, you know, fought back against it, or the different theodicies, right? So the problem of evil is almost wiped out, and people still utilizing it aren't the people in the ivory towers. They're the people still fighting about whether or not good is good and evil is evil in the streets. So within academia, you tend to have lost the argument, but the impact is still there.
Yeah.
Let's see. Okay. The strongest impact on religion, however, was felt in centuries between skepticism ascent and its more recent travails. On a religious level, 18th century English deism was more than ready to accommodate the argument of Hume and others for anti-supernaturalism, which makes sense. Hume was utilizing a lot of their argumentation. You could still have, you know, a God enter the picture at first, but like the blind watchmaker, he winds up the universe and steps back away. So you can still have even a social gospel message there, but a fully kind of Protestant 20th century evangelical expression of faith tends to not happen here. So of course the deist would harp on and hitch their bandwagon to Hume. 19th century religion directly absorbed such a worldview into naturalistic German Protestant liberalism. Right. And, you know, we've covered enough of German Protestant liberalism on the show and in books as well. We're still having to deal with that impact, even on our bibliology as well.
Right. He says naturalistic approaches to religion grew quickly. Right. For example, Hendrik Paulus in 1761 to 1851 offered naturalistic explanations for gospel miracles. Right. So, for instance, the healings merely befitted the ill person's nervous system. So why were they healed? Well, their nervous system. So it was a psychological thing, right? The dead were only suspended in animation. Right. So they weren't really dead. They were in suspended animation. And so they were able to be raised right after their animation ran out. And the feeding of many people were merely involved setting a good example of food sharing. Right. Jesus didn't feed 5,000 people. It was just the example of you should share your food. That's what that miracle is all about, according to Paulus, right?
He was just really good at division, yes.
Yeah. That's right. So he also says that David Friedrich Strauss, again in the 1800s, explained early Christian miracle stories as myths depicted as history. So they're just myths, but they were depicted as history. He tells us developed the 18th century emphasis on naturalistic historical explanation, using literary psychological categories to preserve the value of the text. Right. So the text is important while stripping it any unhistorical supernaturalist elements. So the text is important. We should understand it. But, you know, really what's going on are just myths. They're telling us stories. It's not really history.
Right. And so not quite to this extreme, but this is the work that Lydia McGrew has done, who's been on the show before, does with her responses to Mike Licona and to a lesser degree, I think Gary Habermas as well, of having kind of the genre literature be front and center rather than the apostles were actually expressing what they believed was true history, and they were telling true historical events utilizing the scriptorum devices of their time, and not so much the theory that they're rearranging patterns to make a point that tells the story well or with a false purpose to it. So that comes out here. But we also see this with the Jesus Seminar, right? Which I don't think really, I think it was pretty popular in the 80s and 90s. And of course, that's the 1980s and 1990s, which soon is approaching where we actually have to make that clarification. But this was the idea of, well, Jesus didn't actually walk on the water; he walked by the water, and so it's probably just a bad translation. Yeah, because when Jesus is walking by the water, of course the disciples are in fear and awe of what Jesus is doing. No one has ever walked by the water before,
Yeah.
especially to some fishermen. I mean, that's outrageous to see. So we have this type of the cure is almost as worse as the disease itself of trying to fit that explanation, square peg round hole type deal. All right, so by the late 19th century, skepticism regarding supernatural intervention had become dominant even in much of theological academia. So, you want a place at the table, and this is something that...
So we have to give up miracles and supernaturalism,
right? We have to be thought as serious people, and serious people, you can believe Jesus rose from the dead, but you can't really do that, and you can't think of any of the other ones. So maybe you can fight for the resurrection, but you can't really fight for the Dead Sea, the Red Sea split, or the feeding of the 5,000. So you can't do those ones. But maybe you can do Jesus as a historical person who...
Although it could be a myth, right? It could be a
exactly.
myth, a story to tell us about, living a new life or something, right?
Yeah, there's a reason that liberalism rose up swiftly during this time period of the early 20th century as well. So yes. Well, despite Adolf Harnack's interest in much historical information in the New Testament, for example, he regarded miracles, angels, apocalyptic prophecy, and the like as non-historical alien intrusions on the New Testament message. So Old Testament, you can have those things, but those things should be wiped out in a serious reading of the New Testament. So this is just your guiding principles of communistic sharing among the early church in Acts, and turning the other cheek. Those are all fine. But Jesus prophesying that he would be raised in 3 days, that's definitely something no serious person takes into consideration.
Yeah, that's history, right?
Yeah,
that's not history. It's just myth.
Right. You have doctor before your name and a whole bunch of letters after your name, and you can't believe that, because then you wouldn't be a serious person. Well, he doubted nature miracles and the like, while allowing that Jesus' powerful personality may have affected some recoveries. So, the healing of the blind person just really, really wanted to believe that Jesus would heal him. And so, yeah, he might have had, a knock on the back of his head that suddenly got him to see. So that's how we can explain it. So, yeah, he was born blind, but, he just had a really personal encounter that really changed him and psychosomatically healed him. So that's what we can attribute to it.